if you approach your consultation process really as a sales conversation, what a lot of lawyers think of and when they hear sales is something very different than what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about convincing the person or pushing the person or pressuring the person to say yes to you. It is really about exploring their problem in a way that leads them to see that you are a solution so that they can reach that conclusion on their own. And the more you build out a process for doing this, the more you are very strategic in the questions that you ask, the way that you hold them accountable to the answers that they're giving, the way that you educate them about what could happen if they don't solve their problem, if they're not aware of that for themselves, and how you ultimately are going to offer a solution that's more advantageous to them than either doing nothing or going somewhere else where they're not going to get as good an experience. You are ultimately doing them a service, whether they hire you or not.
Is your sales process structured? Do you even have a sales process? How can a sales process affect your overall client service? Allison Williams of Law Firm Mentor joins us this week to discuss just that. Law Firm Mentor provides coaching services for solo and small law firms, and one of her specialties is perfecting the sales process. Now, we've talked about the importance of this process, and I love how Allison breaks it down into two parts: intake followed by consultation. We discuss where to start training intake staff and handing off those responsibilities. Again, it comes down to a process. Then once you get to the consultation, it's about understanding the underlying issue your client needs to solve and ultimately how you'll deliver the results that they need. What I want you to walk away with is an understanding of how having a structured sales process leads to a better relationship with your clients. This helps set expectations and norms, endears you to your client, lets you really understand their true needs, and ultimately sets you up as the expert. As a technical note, you're going to be able to tell that I had some issues with my audio during this recording. It happens to the best of us. So I was forced to use a lower quality backup here. But even with the lower quality audio, it was great to have all this information that Allison shared with us. So my apologies for my potato quality sound, but let's get to the interview. I'm John Strohmeyer, and this is the 5-Star Counsel Podcast. The market for legal services is shifting, and lawyers who don't adapt will be left behind. This podcast gives you a competitive edge in today's market by sharing in the client service lessons you probably didn't learn in law school or in law practice. Let's start the show. Hey 5-Star listeners, before we start, I want to tell you about our amazing sponsor, Smith AI. Smith AI is a virtual receptionist service for small businesses with a specialty in working with solo and small law firms. I signed up with them within weeks of starting my firm because they are affordable for even the smallest solo practice. Their friendly receptionists respond to potential clients in Spanish or English, screen and schedule new leads, and can even take payments. And now they're answering calls 24 hours a day. So even when you're asleep, they're still working. Even beyond the phone, they've got live agents and chatbots ready to capture leads on your website, by text, and by Facebook Messenger. Smith's friendly gatekeepers can staff your front line so you can work uninterrupted. You can finally have the peace of mind that while you're working, you're not missing out on future work. Plans start at just $70 a month for calls and $100 a month for chats. Smith AI is offering a free trial, and our podcast listeners get an extra $100 discount code with promo code 5-STAR. That's FIVESTAR. Sign up and learn more at www.smith.ai. Don't let another day go by. Try Smith AI.
Thank you for having me, John. I'm really excited to talk to you. You know, sales in a law firm is intake and consultations, right? So the first thing that you are, quote, selling is the idea of someone taking their time, giving their money. I really highly recommend that you charge for your consultations in most scenarios, giving their time and money to you in order to learn more about the legal solution you're going to offer them. And then the second part of that process is the consultation, where they're actually going to come in, they're going to give you information in depth about their problem, you're going to evaluate what options are available, and you're going to recommend a solution that includes hiring you to do something for them. And where there's typically a breakdown for most lawyers and law firms is that we don't think about this as a sales process. So we approach it as a big audition, right? We show up for the prospect. We have on our Sunday best, if you will. We're giving them the best in show. We're letting them know all the legal knowledge, skill, expertise, relationships that we have that are going to be beneficial for them. And at the end of all of that data dump, their minds are now spinning and swirling and not making decisions because they don't have a linear path from problem to solution. They have a whole bunch of information that they don't understand. All that they know is that you sound smart. And then they're either making a decision that this person seems like they can help me, I'll say yes, or I'm thinking about what the price is, I'm going to go shop for a better price because they can't make any other decision. They don't have the wherewithal to do that. So if you approach your consultation process really as a sales conversation, what a lot of lawyers think of and when they hear sales is something very different than what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about convincing the person or pushing the person or pressuring the person to say yes to you. It is really about exploring their problem in a way that leads them to see that you are a solution so that they can reach that conclusion on their own. And the more you build out a process for doing this, the more you are very strategic in the questions that you ask, the way that you hold them accountable to the answers that they're giving, the way that you educate them about what could happen if they don't solve their problem, if they're not aware of that for themselves, and how you ultimately are going to offer a solution that's more advantageous to them than either doing nothing or going somewhere else where they're not going to get as good an experience. You are ultimately doing them a service, whether they hire you or not. And if you think about yourself as a professional, you should really see that that is just as much aligned with being a professional as actually giving out the legal advice. In fact, it's actually more client-centered to do this approach as opposed to just data dumping information, because that really is about your ego as opposed to truly helping them.
Oh, Allison, there is so much to dig into there. Thank you for the overview. I have already written down a page of things to follow up on. The part that I really like and what I think more attorneys need to be thinking about as the starting point is we're not selling when somebody calls in full representation for everything all at once. If somebody gets on a first call with us, we're asking for that baby step of the consultation. I know I've been doing this for about 3 years where every client who comes into my firm, we're starting with a consultation for estate planning because talking to you for 10 minutes, first, it undermines my value if I just say, oh, I've talked to you. I know you have a wife and 2 kids. You just need this. And then saying, here's your answer. Your situation is more complex than that. But it's also giving me a chance to develop more of my value by sitting in the room or Zoom room, wherever it is, for an hour or so to hear what they have to say, what the actual nuances are, so I can get a much better picture of that before we get started.
Right. And I love that you reference like showing your value, because what I think a lot of people miss is that it is in your prospect or client's best interest to think very highly of you, because they are already in a state of distress. Typically when they come to find a lawyer, there's something that prompted them to say, I need help with whatever the problem is. I need help with protecting my family through an estate plan. I need help with divorcing an inappropriate partner. I need help with starting a business, right? So they are already in a state of distress. And if you come in and you start to lower your value to be equal with your prospect, there is a lack of the level of deference that is typically required for a healthy counselor client relationship to form and to be sustainable throughout, right? Because you are a counselor at law. You are giving advice to this person. So I love what you say about, the very first conversation is not where we dig into the nitty gritty and I start saying, all right, here's all the things that I'm going to need for this. The very first conversation in most law firms is typically not with the lawyer. It is typically with someone in your office that ultimately sets the tone for what that relationship is going to be like. So that intake professional can be a secretary. They can be solely exclusively dedicated to intake, depending on what volume you have. But they're really trying to get the basic information: name, rank, serial number, and can we ethically represent you? And if the answer to those questions are yes, you want to get enough of the story so that you can ultimately urge the person to allow you to help them with their problem. And that is where you start framing your relationship with the prospect of, when you come to this law firm, we are in charge, we are in control, we are the advisors, but we are here to help and serve you. Right? So there's both a sense of, yes, I am paying for something. So I, as the client, feel a certain sense of entitlement to have my professional be responsive to me, give me advice, give me assistance. but I am turning myself over to someone who's going to ultimately lead me somewhere. And if you don't create that relationship at the very start, you typically start to see dissension in the ranks when the relationship goes in a place the client doesn't like. So when you give them advice they don't want to hear, they're like, hey, I'm paying for this. I own you. I tell you what to do. What do you mean XYZ? And that is really where I think a lot of lawyers start to have friction in relationships with clients and have a hard time growing businesses and giving good customer service. That's where you start to see grievances, malpractice claims. That's where you start to see negative online reviews, and you start to see a host of problems that really could be avoided if the relationship was set appropriately through a structured sales process.
Right. And this is, again, so many things to go with. The thing I'm going to start with is you don't have to have the attorney be the first person who's getting that information. When you go to the doctor, you don't expect to see the doctor immediately. The nurse is going to come in and take your temperature and all the vitals, and somebody other than the highest level professional is going to get some of that basic information about you, because the high-end professional needs to be focused on the high-end work. We're pushing down to the appropriate level. Now, going on with that, I know there's a lot of advice out there. Lawyers need to be answering the phone immediately. If you're not the one answering the phone, you're missing out. I can see you smiling a little bit, but unfortunately podcasting is an audio medium. Why don't you just go ahead and react to that? You can probably pick up on what I think about that already. But
yeah, so I agree with almost everything in that sentence. So the sentence was, lawyers need to be answering the phone immediately. I'm going to change lawyers to law firms. The law firm needs to be answering the phone immediately, right? So yes, we are in a highly competitive environment. We need to be very responsive as soon as someone reaches out. So everything that you can do to increase the point of contact and the frequency of contact at the time someone is at the point of saying, I want help, the more likely you are to get that person on the phone and get them scheduled. That includes adding things to your website like live chat. That includes having 24-hour call services where you can afford them. That includes having a professional, whether it's an answering service or on-site receptionist or on-site intake person, answer as soon as possible. And if for any reason someone calls and they miss you, their call goes to voicemail, or they call and leave a message at nighttime, you want somebody calling them back right away. You do not want that to be the lawyer for a host of reasons. One, creating that dichotomy again between being extraordinary and being ordinary, right? There's that piece of what we forget about being a professional, that we forget about being in business, is that people need to both see themselves in us, that makes us ordinary, and they need to see themselves as looking up to us, that makes us extraordinary. That ordinary piece is what allows for empathy to be conveyed so that the person believes in you as somebody that could see themselves in your shoes, right? They made what they think of as a stupid mistake, or they're being persecuted by someone, or they're being sued for something they feel they did not do. And they need to know that you empathize with them on a level that allows them to say, this person's on my side. But at the extraordinary level, they also need to look up to you. They need to say, this person has more knowledge, skill, expertise than I have, and therefore it is appropriate that I defer to them because they know things that I don't know. And if you don't have both of those in the relationship, you're going to have a disconnect with your client. So it's really important that that ordinary piece, that seeing themselves in you, starts at the relational side of a person who is not you, right? So they get that ordinary from your team, your staff member, your outside answering service, and they get that extraordinary from you. And if you have both of those pieces together, you get to focus on the higher paid, more technically skilled work that a lawyer is required for, and everything in the business then scales down to the person who is the least expensive but most qualified person to do the work. So that means some things go to a paralegal, some things to a secretary, some things to a receptionist, and then you have the most profitable business that you can create.
There's again, Allison, I feel like we could spend hours just pulling apart everything you say every time you open your mouth. I'm going to go with this first. It comes and it reminds me back to what David C. Baker says throughout his business of expertise. We're the expert, and if we are immediately available, it undermines our value as the expert. If anybody can get through, that makes it, it really just doesn't verify that we're an in-demand provider.
Correct.
And still agreeing with you on the law firm needs to have immediate answering, make sure it's easy for people who raise their hands to get in and get some help show that you have been heard as a potential client. But again, we can't be the one who is there on the phone as the lawyer. If we're jumping from the work we do, that is the deep level work, to answering the basic phone call when it comes in, we're never going to get anything done. We need to be able to focus and put our heads down and do that important work. And it's also going to convey to the client, look, I didn't drop everything to answer your phone call when you called the first time, and you're still getting taken care of. When somebody new comes in, you know that you're going to get my undivided attention. I'm not going to be laying on my phone while you're sitting in a meeting with me. I'm not going to drop out for a phone call while we're on a Zoom. It just shows the respect that you need to give to each of your clients as well as to your staff.
Yeah. Well, I think I agree with all of that 100%. And I think where a lot of lawyers struggle is, especially when you're starting out, right? When you're in that first $100,000 to $150,000 of revenue and you're hustling to get clients through the door, there is a mindset that says that if I miss an opportunity, another one won't come, right? So I am building, so I need to take every opportunity I can. I need to get to every person that I can. And that typically means that the best person to get on the phone, who's going to have the greatest likelihood of getting the person scheduled for a consult, needs to answer the phone. And that usually is the lawyer. But that is only because lawyers don't take the time necessary to create a system whereby they train their intake professional to increase the likelihood that people that call are going to schedule, to cultivate the right customer service attitude from the beginning, to get the person in as soon as possible and understand the schedule of the lawyer to make that happen. So there's a lot of pieces that I think lawyers don't think about that necessitates them being the one who answers the phone. And so they buy into the story that I'm the best at this, so I have to do it. And you're right, you are the best at this because you won't let anyone else be the best at it. You have decided you would rather be the mediocre at everything because you can only spread yourself so thin before you start to have law of diminishing returns, rather than take the time, energy, and yes, resources to train the right person to do the job even better than you could.
Right. And looking at this, I've got a few questions on operationalizing that intake staff and training staff before I do want to get some insight from you on consultation. And just thinking about training the staff, you're so right, we can't do everything well. We've got to pick and choose. And so that does mean we're going to have to hand off some of these pieces. So in terms of training staff so that they can make this a repeatable process, where do you get started?
Oh God. Well, there's so much that goes into training an intake professional. In fact, I have a whole course called Intake Mastery that is, several weeks of information on the step-by-step of how to do that. But just to kind of give you a broad level overview, the first thing is choosing the right person in the first place, right? This is not a paper pusher. This is a sales role. So you need to have somebody who has some basic attributes of sales. They need to be personable. They need to be inquisitive. And they need to function as an employee, even if they are a part-time person or a contract person. You need to have a person who is under your tutelage so that you can actually train and develop them. Once you have that right person, you then have to get them into a structure, which means they might not have to read a script, but they definitely need to have a script with talking points. They need to know the order in which we gather information, the vitality of gathering the pertinent information on there, right? We don't just ask for people's adverse party because it's cool to ask. We ask because of ethics, right? So you have to get that information. And then you have to move them through a process of how to talk about their problem so that they're not just verbally vomiting on you and you're on the phone for an hour and a half, right? There are certain things that you want to get from them to understand the urgency of their problem. Is there any time pressure to their problem? Meaning, do they have court tomorrow? In which case, we're having a different conversation than if you want to file something that you have a statute of limitations that doesn't run for 2 years, right? Very different scenario. So you have to learn how to guide a conversation, which involves a very structured process of interjecting and not interrupting. That means stopping someone if they don't stay on the matter of fact of what you need. And then guiding them to ultimately, how serious is this? How quickly do you need to get in here? And then impressing upon them, here's how we can help you, and here's how quickly we can get you in. Once you have that script, then is a process of actually training your intake professional to deliver that script consistently in high quality in a way that will get people booked. So that typically means listening out for what I refer to as TEPT, their tone, their empathy, their pace, the pitch, and their transitions. So tone is pretty simple, right? Do you have a pleasant sounding demeanor? Are you comforting and reassuring to the person? That goes into the empathy. Are you somebody who recognizes and says to the person, I'm so sorry that you're going through that. It's so unfortunate that you have a need for us, but we're here to help you. So that that person feels immediately that you're on their side, right? There's something psychologically as a trigger for people talking about problems, especially if they're a status oriented person, right? Identifying yourself as having a problem when you're a person who solves problems tends to be something that is a psychological barrier for many people. So you break down those barriers by showing empathy. Then the pace, right? Sometimes you get a person on the phone, they're super bubbly, they're talking at the speed of lightning, they're just racing on through. Other times you get somebody who's more like an Eeyore. They're kind of lollygagging, it's challenging for them to find their words. You want to find the right pace to guide the conversation. Sometimes that means faster than the prospect, sometimes it means slower than the prospect. And when you need to interject, you're going to change your pace. So if the person is speaking slowly and you want to interject, this is when you're going to very quickly say their name with a little uptick in the sound of your voice to then interrupt them. Or if they're talking very slow or if they're talking very fast, you want to slow it down when you interject and say their name. Then, of course, you want the pitch, right? You need to get them very solid on what they're going to say about your law firm that differentiates you in the marketplace, your unique competitive advantage. What is it about you that makes you something other than one of the thousands of lawyers that they could have chosen, right? And this is not typically a list of awards or a list of credentials. Some of it could be that. But the things that tend to connect the most from a psychological perspective with most people is, what is it about the problem that has you expertly qualified to solve the problem? If you're a special needs attorney, do you have a special needs child? If you are a divorce attorney, were you a child of divorce? If you are a real estate attorney, have you purchased and sold multiple pieces of real estate? Did you have trouble in your first real estate transaction? If you're a personal injury attorney, are you doing that work because a relative of yours was screwed over by an insurance company, right? What is it that makes it personal to you? And if you don't have a personal tie, what is it about that work that speaks to you as a person? So some of the attributes of status, the awards, the credentials, some of that matters, but you also want to personalize it so that you are uniquely suited to help the person. And then finally, the transition, right? You don't want to just let the person tell their story, wait till they finish and say, all right, well, here's what it's going to cost you to come in, right? You don't want to have an abrupt kind of, now I'm done having to listen to all that crap. And let me tell you what matters to me kind of attitude. You really want it to be, now that I've gotten what I need to understand you and understand what your problem is, let me now guide you over to the solution. And the solution is that we are uniquely suited to help you because of A, B, and C. Here's what our process is to do that. Here's what the cost is going to be to get you in. And I want to get you in as soon as possible because of what you've identified as your urgency point. You've got court next week. You're really scared. We want to get you some help.
Sorry, as I scribble down notes to make sure that we follow up. I mean, there's just so much, and I can see why there is multiple weeks of training on there. Obviously, we're not going to get through all of it, but making sure we've structured a conversation so that it gets the client through, or the potential client at this point, through to helping them make the right decision to make sure, look, if we're the right firm or not to help them, we want to help them realize that as soon as possible. What it isn't is going back with the Wolf of Wall Street. They return to the sell me this pen, and everybody, not only are they starting off with, well, do you have a pen? Here, I've got this pen, it's pretty nice. They're missing the underlying point of, are you even in the market for a pen? Mm-hmm. Is this pen the right one for you? Spend 5 minutes, and obviously these intake conversations are more than 5 minutes, but spending the 5 minutes to even think, are they actually in the market for a pen? Is there something that we can do to find out what that pain point is that a pen might solve? It may not be they need black ink on white paper. It may be I need a tube that's about 4.5 inches long right now. Would you be interested in it? And really figuring out, well, maybe it's the ingenuity of coming up with how that pen could help them. So I think we're going to leave the intake conversation there because we do need to talk about, well, once we've transitioned them from the intake call, we've got them in a consultation. What are we looking to do in the consultation?
Yeah. So the consultation is the extension of what you started in intake, right? You started the exploratory, what is your problem and what is your urgency to solve it. You're essentially looking for the same thing in the sales conversation. So I'll go over some high level questions that you ask to try to understand your prospect and guide them from problem to your solution. And then we can kind of talk about how to encapsulate this. So the first thing you always want to know is what is the problem, right? And not just what is the problem, like, I'm being sued by someone, or I want to file an action in court for some relief, or I need an estate plan, right? You intellectually understand that already by virtue of having started the process of intake, right? But intake allows you to start building rapport in your consultation. So you start with building a little bit of rapport. And then when you ask them about the problem, what you're really concerned with is how it affects them, right? Not just, I've got this problem in my life, but tell me what it's doing to your life. Like, why is this something that you want to do something about now? What is ultimately prompting you to come in and seek a solution to the problem? Because that's typically where you're going to immediately get the sense of urgency, right? The person's going to usually start with what's most important and or end with what's important, right? They're going to either do primacy or recency or some combination of both. But you're going to get a sense of what the issues are. And then you can explore those a little bit more. You really want to ask follow-up questions, So I understand your problem to be X, Y, and Z. How long have you had it? What have you done to try to solve it? Who have you spoken with about this problem? How is it affecting your finances? How is it affecting your relationships? What is it doing to your life to have this problem? Can you envision your life without this problem? So you're really exploring the aspirations and afflictions, right? The aspirations to get out of the problem and the afflictions of the problem with the person. Then you move into understanding the impact of the problem. And the impact of the problem really is what I like to refer to as hitting the wall, right? If we don't do anything about this problem and it continues to build and build and build the way that we have established by exploring all those aspirations and afflictions, what's going to be the consequence? If in this person's mind, the consequence of not solving the problem is minor, then the person probably is not going to get to an urgency point that allows them to write a check for $25,000 to retain you, unless they're ultimately rich and don't have any financial constraints whatsoever. Most people hiring lawyers are not. So you need to have the problem expanded so that the impact of the problem and not doing anything is in their mind logically connected to the size of the problem, i.e., I got this huge problem over here, and if I don't do anything, I'm going to have a really bad consequence. I'm going to lose my friendships. I'm going to lose my job. I'm going to lose my money. I'm going to have a problem that's worse than the existing problem, right? Because you want to get them to see how bad the problem is so that when you offer the solution, it pales in comparison to retaining the problem. Then the final thing that we want to get to is really getting on the other side of it, like helping them see that life without this problem is doable. Now, this is not where the lawyer wants to dive in and solve the problem, right? Don't start trying to pour cold water on all that fire that you've now unearthed by virtue of talking about the problem. But you do want them to dream a little bit, like life without this problem looks a lot better. So that when you offer that solution, it's like, oh, yes, I can get to the other side of this problem. That big, scary impact of the problem isn't going to face me if I go ahead and hire this lawyer to help me.
Well, again, so much to build off of, and we only have so much time. Really, what we're looking for, and it's something that I've said here, is we're looking to move the needle for the client. The client, for my estate planning practice, they don't come in because they're all jazzed up to get some boring documents. It's digging down and figuring out what are they really trying to avoid. For me, it's the mess at the end of the day. When they pass, nobody, no matter how many, for the decade I've been practicing, nobody's ever come in and said, I want to leave a mess on it. I've seen all sorts of weird requests, leave this here, leave that there, split this up among these people, give him a share, don't give her a share. All sorts of weird things without even getting into anything even close to the cases we discussed in law school. Like, nobody's really worried about spending a night in the haunted mansion or marrying inside the religion. That honestly has never come up. But it's the mess and showing them what the mess could look like and saying just having the documents isn't going to be enough. You need to think about, here are the things that I want you to consider of how your plan can get undermined. And if we can show them it's not just the DIY documents you're going to get from LegalZoom, because, go spend $50, you'll get documents that will do things, whether or not they work for you, whether or not they've had somebody who's helped do this before. That's what you really want if you want to avoid that particular mess in the context of estate plan. No. And so that's what I've always wanted to look for is it's the deeper level. It's not just have documents. It's not get a recovery in a PI suit. It's not just get divorced. It's what does it look like on the other side? Because it's much easier to tap into what they really want and how you can actually solve the deeper level, why are they walking in this door problem.
Yeah, well, since you mentioned LegalZoom, I think a lot of legal professionals are pensive and frankly scared about kind of the non-attorney invading the space, coming into the field and being able to offer the low-cost solution of something that seems like it's comparable to what you offer. And the lawyers that will continue to be employed and continue to grow and continue to demonstrate the need for their services will be those that are able to talk about the nature of the problem so that the problem is a more sophisticated solution. It requires a more sophisticated solution than just plug and play, putting words on LegalZoom or Rocket Matter or any of the other sources out there and creating a DIY solution.
Right. There's a few episodes ago, we were talking with Conrad Sam specifically about LegalZoom opening a practice in Arizona, the fact that Jeff Bezos has invested in accounting. Are we all doomed? The answer is no. The reality is you have to differentiate yourself. You have to stand apart from the crowd one way or another, whether it's subject matter, whether it's empathizing with a particular problem and dealing with that more effectively than anybody else. You have to dig down. If you're going to be the tour guide to law where anybody can come in and replicate what you're doing, yes, you're going to have a hard time because if anybody can replicate it, LegalZoom, Google, a chatbot probably can come in. And it's, as you said, and as we've talked about multiple times, the empathy and the meeting people where they are so that you can figure out what that needle is that you can help them move. That's what's going to keep you employed. And now I'm just kind of wandering, losing my train of thought.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, it really is. It's about the relationship, right? An attorney-client relationship is what people are paying for. They're not paying for the document or the process. They're paying for the solution and being advised and supported through whatever problem they have or whatever need they have transactionally on the other side. And so lawyers that do that are ultimately never going to be unemployed.
Right. Allison, I think this is probably a great place for us to close the interview. We could keep going forever. Before I let you go, what is one thing people could do to get started in operationalizing the sales and intake process of law firms?
Yeah. So John, what I would suggest for everyone is that you absolutely have to have a process for how to conduct your intake calls and how to conduct your sales conversations. And so for that, I've created a resource. It's absolutely free. Lawyers can get it at lawfirmmentor.net/getting prospects to yes. There's a dash between each of those words, getting prospects to yes. And getting prospects to yes is actually a very short 5-video series. You get 1 video a day for 5 days. The videos are 15 minutes or less. So super easy to watch. We have a little guide that goes with each of them to actually walk you through how to ask the right questions, how to create a series of follow-up conversations so that you can get the person to yes on their timeline. Some people will convert at the first meeting, some will take longer, but that resource is available for everyone.
Excellent. Allison, where else can we find you online?
Well, every place that we exist on social media is Law Firm Mentor. And of course, our website is also Law Firm Mentor. So you can find us on the web at lawfirmmentor.net and on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all at Law Firm Mentor.
Excellent. Allison, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, John. This has been great.
Thanks so much for listening. You can find more info on us and get your free white paper on client service at 5starcounsel.com. You can get in touch with me at john@5starcounsel.com. If you enjoyed the podcast, please subscribe wherever fine podcasts are found and leave us a review wherever you can.